I'm sitting here today with my friend Deborah Burns, and we're going to be talking about obstacles. I want to get a little context for this conversation. First of all, it's March 10th, 2020, and we are at the beginning, the middle, or perhaps even the end of a coronavirus scare right now in New York and in the United States. And when Deb and I were first talking about obstacles, we had some very specific things in mind, but I think it's relevant to acknowledge that there are obstacles all around us, and how we choose to respond to them is incredibly important in defining who we are and how we interact with our community. One of the reasons this conversation came up originally was that I deal with a lot of obstacles in my clients' lives as part of the coaching. And instead of avoiding them, I encourage them to unpack those obstacles, to see what there is to learn in them. When Deborah and I talked about this, she lit up, and there's some very good reasons why, which you will hear shortly. But first, let me give you a little bit of background. Deborah is a former magazine media brand leader, a chief innovation officer, and a consultant. She's written a highly acclaimed memoir about her unconventional mother called Saturday's Child. This creative journey illuminated leadership lessons that, despite her business background, she never knew until she wrote a book. She then created Life Authoring, the way to think like a writer for greater career success. And now she speaks inside of corporations to inspire employees and has a soon-to-be-released LinkedIn learning course, as well as a forthcoming book. As someone who tore through Saturday's Child in a matter of a day or two, I can say that there are an enormous number of juicy nuggets in there, and that's one of the reasons I'm so excited to talk to you today, Deb, about necessary obstacles. So, first question is, why are obstacles necessary? Or why are obstacles a necessary element of an engaging plot?
Well, before I answer that question, great opening, and I love how you wove in the pandemic. It is an obstacle to face, and we're all going to learn something from having faced it, especially the ones who don't get sickened by it. We're really going to learn a lot. Obstacles are so necessary to any engaging plot because the narrative arc of any great story always follows the same pattern, the same cycles. Something changes, that kicks off a quest, things get worse, then get worse again. We're seeing some of that now. And then there's a glimmer of hope. Then there's always another little setback. And finally, evolution. There is no story without these narrative arc cycles, and obstacles are a part of it. Think of it like elastic or a push-pull or any little metaphor that you want to have. You don't get evolution without the obstacle. Something is always blocking the quest in a story. If there's not, there's no story. If there were no obstacles, if there were no antagonists, again, there would be no story. Everything would be too beautiful, too perfect. Nobody would be striving for anything, and nobody would be paying attention. And stories reflect life, life reflects stories, and the structure of a narrative arc with its almost seasonal cycles are perfect metaphors for life.
That's fantastic. And one of the things that I'm smiling as I'm listening to you, because it's March, this is Women's History Month, and we talk about the hero's journey a lot. I'm actually also very interested in exploring at some point the heroine's journey and how that might be different, and how those plot and character points along the way for heroine's journey could differ slightly. But before we unpack that, I'd love to know, what kinds of obstacles are the juiciest?
Well, I can't wait to come back to the hero and heroine's journey. I'm pretty gender neutral there, because obstacles are obstacles. They may be slightly different. For a heroine, that might be wrestling with a little more internal, or a struggle between family and work, more than a hero. However, the obstacles and the cycles are the same for both of them. The juiciest obstacles are really the internal ones. External conflict is the easiest to identify and to quantify. Someone or something is out to get me, or I'm ahead of my time and the world is not ready for my ideas, or there's a stock market crash or a pandemic. But the juiciest conflict is what's going on inside. We are all so often in our own way, and you know that as a coach. And in so many different ways are we in our own way. We are often our own worst enemies. Self-sabotage, from fears to doubt to limiting beliefs, trips us up every day in so many different ways.
That is music to a coach's ear, because of course that's exactly the space in which my work dwells, and I love hearing it as thought through a literary metaphor or context. So tell me why some of these obstacles are a necessary element of our life story. I understand from a literary perspective, but let's talk a little bit more about why they're so important to the life narrative.
Well, because stories, as I said, are just like life, we need stressors to test us. And in so doing, they make us rise to the occasion. Overcoming obstacles builds resistance and fortitude and competency. It bestows confidence when you successfully complete something. Obstacles are our mountains to climb.
I love that. I love the connection between obstacles and that feeling. I think of it as a feeling of pride in oneself. Pride not in as in one of the 7 sins, but a pride in oneself.
Sure.
For having addressed this. And I say this as someone who is a people pleaser, who is conflict averse. And this will come as no surprise, I tend to attract clients who have some of the same issues.
It's amazing how that happens.
And so if you are conflict averse and you love to please people, conflict itself and obstacles can be very frightening. And so seeing the utility of them, I think, is not only eye-opening, I think it's groundbreaking. And I think that what you've just referenced, the sense of pride and of success in overcoming them, is something you don't have when it's all just smooth sailing. I'd like to ask you to unpack the different utility, really the different learning, from challenges as presented by situations or plot and character.
In a narrative arc, challenges present turning points that keep the story moving forward through action and then response to that action. And for me, the biggest utility here is that there are always trials, even when you are on the right path. If you understand the cycles, you are able to frame situations from a this will all work out perspective, and that makes you more confident. If you don't understand the predictable cycles of the narrative arc, you can get stuck and feel afraid. So this is the one I would pick as my first unpacking, since most people pack this. I hear often, I'm following my bliss, or I'm living my purpose, and then this happened, and this happened, and this happened. And it really is understanding that even when you are doing what you're supposed to be doing, even when you're on the right path, there will always be tests and trials so that you can further evolve and be your best self.
So evolution, personal development, professional development require obstacles.
Absolutely. Require it. It is a prerequisite for getting to where you need to go.
It makes me think, I happen to be wearing a pair of pearl earrings today, and it's funny, I very rarely wear pearls anymore, but pearls exist because a grain of sand was put into an oyster to stimulate this beautiful growth. Without it, oysters that might be delicious to eat, but they wouldn't produce gems.
That's right. Exactly. Well said. There's a book in you too.
I'm a jeweler's wife. I can't help myself.
But there is one other suitcase to unpack, and in addition to the narrative arc in every story, there's a parallel track, there's a character arc for that heroine or hero, also known as the protagonist. And there's a lot of learning and lessons in that arc, because protagonists are very different at the end of a story from how they started. There's always some sort of evolution brought on by the obstacles that they have faced down. To transform, they not only have to welcome conflict, but they have to deeply understand characters, those around them and themselves, because that's the biggest character to understand. And they have to do all this to step into the unknown, because that's where the new awaits. And so as a coach, I think one of the challenges, but also one of the opportunities, is to let go of the fear that holds people back from stepping into the unknown, because that's where the obstacles and the trials ultimately will lead them or put them. And transformation requires them to flip their script in some way.
Yep, absolutely.
Right? So to evolve, they will have to shift a mindset, an attitude, or an approach based on all they've learned from the obstacles they faced.
I couldn't agree more, and you're right, this is such an essential element of coaching. One of the things I also think about is there are characters in our lives who may not make us happy, who may not be our biggest supporters. And I think there's a tendency to push against that. Whereas what I try to do is say, where is the learning? Why is this person here? What do I have to learn from it? What behavior am I witnessing that I don't want to engage in myself? What behavior am I witnessing that might be a mirror to something I don't like so much in myself? And so all of these characters, including the ones who support us and love us and cheer us on, have something to teach us, and in the framework that we're discussing today, are absolutely necessary. So, because you are a published author and a writer, a consultant and many other things, I'm curious, what are a couple of the tools that you use, both in your writing and as a consultant, to help your audience successfully embrace obstacles?
When I decided to write, I immersed myself in all the existing wisdom that is there for aspiring authors. So much has been codified, from story structure to character development, but 98% of the population is unaware because they have no intention, like the crazy 2% that I'm in, of ever being a writer. So my toolbox for non-writers includes writing techniques that I apply to office life to lift outcomes, from differentiation to expression and critical thinking to counterintuitive approaches. The list goes on, and I learned all of it from immersing myself in the wisdom of the writing world, and I share it with people that may not have had that opportunity.
I hear what you're saying, and I also wonder if part of it is that just do it mentality. So much we learn from just doing it.
Absolutely, and there's a great writer analogy for that. You stare at the blank page. You're alone. If it doesn't come from you, if you don't put that first word down and continue on from there, nothing happens. So writers, maybe more than any other group, deeply understand just do it.
Yep, I think it's essential in many areas of life. So, going back now a little bit to the plot, the evolution of narrative arc and character, how do you define a successful resolution and not leave us, the reader, the audience, hanging?
Well, suspense is part of any good story and any page turners, but with real life, we don't want any cliffhangers. So to me, a successful resolution is one where that protagonist stretches and emerges better than before. I mean, that would be the simplest way to put it, because in whether it's the Wizard of Oz or Shrek or Mrs. Maisel or Fleabag or anything that's happening in the real world now.
You just named many of my favorite shows.
Well, we have a lot in common. But there is always an inciting incident for that protagonist that puts them into in unknown territory where they have to find their way, stretch, achieve, and they end up differently than they began. So that, to me, is a successful resolution in the work world and in life coaching as well. You need to be more aware, more conscious, and better than you were before. And to best do that, there has to be conflict resolution throughout the story, which means that external and internal antagonists have to be dealt with. There are many tactics here led by disarming and diffusing those inner and outer critics, and I'll leave that to you.
Much work to be done.
As the expert, yes.
Well, this is so illuminating. I can't thank you enough. And I would like to maybe circle back now, just for a couple of moments, to talk about the difference between the hero's journey and the heroine's journey.
So I'm going to be gender neutral here.
All right.
I do think heroines face different obstacles, perhaps, than heroes do. They might be more driven for family. I'm not sure if that's universally true anymore. It's certainly changing. So how I would look at it is the hero and the heroine have the same journey with the same cycles. The meat of it, the plot, that informs the spine of the narrative arc may be different for the heroine and the hero, but the same things are happening to them from a cycle point of view.
Yep. And I appreciate the general neutral approach, and as you know, I coach both men and women and feel quite grateful to have the opportunity to do that. I will say I have noticed a couple of differences in terms of obstacles. One is that women, in my experience, are more likely to have the obstacle of imposter syndrome to work through as they claim their voice, as they claim their seat at the table, as they claim their power. Men have other obstacles, other challenges, but I do think that that is slightly gendered.
I hear you, but I would just refer to it as that's a different storyline.
Okay.
The cycles of that narrative arc of something changing, it gets more bleak. It gets more bleak again. Then there's a glimmer of hope. Then there's resolution. Think of all the romantic comedies from Romeo and Juliet, from the dawn of written time. There is a boy and a girl. They're star-crossed. There are obstacles in their way. And then they get together at the end or die. But so the storylines change, but if you map those stories to a narrative arc, they're always, always, always the same. And those characters are evolving within. So I just look at the difference between the journeys of the two genders as different storylines. Yes, the storyline of women may have more of imposter syndrome as one of the internal obstacles on that character arc that she needs to overcome, but she's still following the same cycles of the narrative arc to come out on the other side of it.
And I would say that unlike Romeo and Juliet, I work very hard with my clients, and I know you do with yours as well, to make sure that there's a little bit more of the happily ever after.
We're shooting for happy endings, for sure.
And I think one of the ways to, if not ensure, but to work towards a happy ending, is to understand that obstacles are an important part of your journey, whether it's your journey at work or your journey at home. You don't get to happily ever after by having everything be smooth sailing. You do it by showing up, by growing, and by transforming.
And it's what you said at the beginning about the lessons. If you frame your mindset to look at the obstacles as lessons for you to further evolve, you will flip the switch and you will look at them differently. And one important thing that actually is not so pleasant for the conflict adverse is that the bigger you get and the bigger the life you lead, sometimes the bigger the trials and the bigger the decisions. It doesn't get easier. It's kind of like children. When you have a newborn and they say, wait till they get older, the problems get worse. As you continue to evolve and achieve new levels of mastery, you're going to get hit with trials that test that so that you can go further. So it is a part of life, always. And if we can view it as a healthy part of growth, then maybe we'll welcome them instead of kind of trying to put our heads in the sand or run in the opposite direction.
Okay. And I would say a healthy and essential
Yes.
part of growth. Well, I can't thank you enough. It's been such a joy to speak with you today.
So fun, always.
And I look forward to future conversations.
Me too. Thank you.